up, football fans? Welcome to the SumerSports show. Lindsay Rhodes here with the one and only Thomas Dimitroff. Thrilled to be joining this show in the vacated metaphorical seat that my friend Eric Eager once filled. Totally ready, Thomas, to geek out on some of that good Sumer data and cross-check it with the real-world football experience of yourself. This is in many ways an absolute dream show for me, and so happy to get started.
Look, you got it. What up is exactly what's going on. There's a lot going on. There's a lot going on in this business, but more importantly, our show, right? Talking about great football. Again, I was going to say, and I know you're not a big college football fan. You're a USC fan. I know you agree with that, but this is a big weekend in Atlanta, right? Chick-fil-A kickoff, Clemson, Georgia, a lot already buzzing around this town. So again, I'm excited to be a football person this weekend.
Yeah, the thing about college for me is just bandwidth, right? Like I got 32 teams. I want to dedicate every waking moment that I'm not with my kids to focusing on the 32 teams in the NFL. And I can't do it all day on Saturday too. So USC plays LSU this weekend and we'll see how that goes. But let's get back to the NFL. I want to say really quickly, because this is my first SumerSports show with you. I know you already have an existing fan base. I am no Eric Eager. I do not know how to run Python. As far as I knew 2 years ago, that was a snake. I can hardly help my son with his 5th grade math, so I will not be filling his role in any way. I will, however, promise you that the tenor of the show that I was a subscriber of, I listened all the time to you two last year, as a place where you can come and have smart, multifaceted football conversations. That's not going to change. I love data. I love talking to people who know more about this sport than I do. I love learning about football. And it's my goal that we will all learn something new in every episode that you will, by the way, be able to find every Tuesday and Thursday on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and Twitter. Thomas, it's also my goal that we have fun. Maybe it should be my goal that I lower my word per minute rate. I mean, holy coffee intake this morning, Lindsay. Slow your roll. What do you? I feel like I have it in my brain that you don't drink coffee.
No, I drink coffee and I drink tea. I manage my caffeine, however.
Okay. I feel like maybe it was just that you're just in general much, much healthier than me. And so I had it in my brain that you're like out there, like bike riding, like it's the Tour de France every day here.
When you get into your 50s, you have to start thinking about longevity. You don't even bother reading those books yet. That's what we do in our 50s. We have to keep on top of all that.
Oh my gosh. The theme of today's show is going to be rookie quarterbacks. But first, before we get to the rookie quarterbacks, I want to bring up a veteran quarterback who there was a little bit of news about that came down today, and that has to do with Deshaun Watson and the fact that the Browns restructured his contract. And I want to ask you about this for a couple of reasons. One, like we know that his whole contract is fully guaranteed. They're going to have to pay all of this money at some point anyway. So it's just about structuring stuff for a variety of different reasons. His cap hit, now that they've restructured it, is going to be $27.9 million this year. It goes up to $72.9 million next year. And then it's $72.9 million the year after that. That's 2026. What I think is interesting and want to get your thoughts on, Thomas, is that they converted $44 million of his salary for this year to a signing bonus to create cap room now. The move cleared almost $36 million for them to bring their available cap space at this moment to roughly $60 million. That's the most in the NFL. My brain, as somebody who has never sat in a front office, is what are they clearing all this cap space for? Are they going to make a move? Who are they going to go out and get? Who's somebody that's expensive that they might actually try to bring in? Is that where your brain goes, or is there a different reason that they might be doing this?
Honestly, my brain does go to, we did a lot of restructuring, and my brain goes to, they are restructuring for the future. And it's not about the acquisition of what you want to do is talk about Brandon Ayuk or someone like that, right? No,
yeah,
I get
that'd be fun.
I think that the basic idea is that they are just simply creating space with a player that they know they're not going to be moving on from at this point. And that's what we always did with our restructures, right? We take the big players like Matt Ryan, like Julio Jones back in the day. We make space and room for the idea that we could make a move if we wanted to. But in my mind, I'm thinking they already had this in their brain about creating. This was part of their long-term plan. That's how I'm looking at it, as a sound, well thought out general manager. But I do want to go to what you're saying, the idea of making moves, right? Is that where your head's going as a like big time follower and fan of the NFL? What are they creating?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, because it's so for I'm not deep in the weeds about like what creating $60 million worth of cap space right now would how that would affect their books for next year or the year after that. I mean, obviously, we're looking at a $72 million, $73 million cap hit next year. So I'm kind of thinking two things. One, you better get it done now
Mhm.
because that cap hit's massive and you're not going to be able to go make a lot of free agency moves next off season. Tell me if I'm wrong. But
Correct.
also, if you're creating $60 million now and you didn't do this back before free agency when you could have just signed a bunch of people, like what are you making that space for? Who are these? What do you need that money for? Otherwise, you just have $60 million worth of cap space to use on nothing. Like what? It doesn't make sense to me. But going back to the Ayuk thing,
Mm.
I actually have thought about what you said, and I don't think I do want him to go to Cleveland because
Okay.
Deshaun Watson has been a little bit
Mm.
iffy, and Ayuk would help, but I don't know if I want him there. Anyway, but am I wrong to think what I'm thinking?
No, look, I think again, we would look at it every year and we would decide on who we were going to restructure if in fact we needed to. And again, remember, Atlanta Falcons, Arthur Blank, myself, our group, we were always in the top third for sure in spending, right? That's what we wanted to do. It's what Arthur Blank wanted to do for the community. I only use that as an example because we were always looking to see where we could restructure and create more space. We would spend a lot and then we would try to create space with the players that we knew again were going to be around for a while. You would never do that, of course. You would never restructure a player that you're going to cut in the next year. So I just don't think we need to go overbearing on this as far as the idea that they're going to make a move on it. You may knock on my door in the next day and say, Thomas, I told you, I'm a better general manager prospect than you. Look
Oh,
what I found out.
I have guided several fantasy football teams to championships, so I think we are a little bit same, right?
Yes, no question. Got it. We're there.
Okay, so another veteran quarterback move that caught my eye today, and it's a little bit under the radar, but it just has to do with like roster building type stuff. The Chargers traded for Taylor Heineke yesterday, actually, and just for a conditional sixth. Herbert has been banged up in the preseason. Could this be a sign that they think that they might need to play a backup at some point, and that maybe we should be a little bit like thinking that that injury might be a cause of concern for them, or is it just a sign that they like Heineke a lot more than Easton Stick, who didn't look particularly good in the preseason, and that the comp is low?
I think when you have a stud quarterback like they do have, yes, you're always concerned about them going down and the what ifs. We talked about that a lot with Matt Ryan. We were very fortunate not to have that situation. He missed 1.5 games in 14 years. Herbert, I don't know the exact stats. We probably need to check what they are. I think it's just bring in a guy that they know if there was a nick, something happened to Herbert, that he could come in and manage a game, potentially win a game. I mean, he's an aggressive, competitive football player. You do want that. You want that as your backup quarterback. You want that or one of your three quarterbacks. I think that's important. I think they may be just thinking like the last thing we need to do is miss a run on a game. If we have a sprained ankle, I'm just making it something easy. And do we have the right person to step in? I will tell you, there's nothing worse than that when your dude goes down and you think, man, we are out 2 games and we have no chance. That is an unnerving situation as a team builder for sure.
Absolutely. And it's in a somewhat interesting situation. We talked about this on Cut Down Day about the three quarterback rule and the late changes to that. And so a lot of teams only have two quarterbacks on their 53-man roster anyway. A few did carry three quarterbacks, one that we're going to talk about today. But let's get to the rookie quarterback conversation here. And the big news of the day out of New England that they're going to start the season with Jacoby Brissett instead of Drake May. This has been an interesting conversation point, I think, throughout the preseason because there are clearly pros and cons about whether you would want to play Drake May out of the gate or sit him and maybe protect him for the long term. What do you think were some of the things that they were going back and forth on there in that front office that led them to this answer?
Look, we all know that Drake May has legitimate skills, right? He's got athletic ability to move. It's a really good mixture, as well as intelligence, et cetera, et cetera. I know there's all types of talk out there, even from their former head coach, right? Saying that he was behind potentially, I believe that Bill Belichick had mentioned about footwork and some of the nuanced elements of the quarterback. Yes, he's probably behind in that area. And everyone deals with that. When, the new quarterbacks that come into your system, you want them to be out there right away. You want them to develop. You want to be proud that they are supporting and representing what you did in the draft or in free agency, of course, in this situation in the draft. I think personally, they are thinking, let's ease him in a little bit. I don't believe that there's that much pressure from the front office and from the ownership that you need to win right out the gate with this new quarterback that you put your money on. I don't believe that that's the mindset there.
Yeah, I don't think anybody thinks, and this is the kind of thing that they can't say out loud, right? But I don't think anybody is looking at the Patriots this year and going, well, foot on the pedal. This is the year. I think everybody knows that this is kind of an evaluation year. You get a read on a bunch of different things and you're building towards something else. That said, I would submit that as a reason to potentially start him right out of the gate, because if you know that you're not going to win the Super Bowl this year, that's not what we're looking at, then go ahead and just get him as many reps as possible, so that then when you are able to cross your fingers, be more competitive next year, he has so much experience under his belt and he's ready to hit the ground running. There are clearly other factors in play here, but what do you think in terms of just that approach? Like in general, if you're looking at a year that is not expected to be particularly competitive, getting that guy as many reps as possible.
Look, I could go on and on about this, Lindsay. I mean, the simple fact in this league is you need to win and you need to win now. You are not given, as a general manager, as a new head coach, you're not given 5 years to mess around, right? I am all about playing the quarterback right away. I mean, we played Matt Ryan. I don't want to continue to always come back to Atlanta, but my experience there is the first shot we ever took was to get him confidence, and he threw a touchdown pass. It was unbelievable, right? The emotion and what it did for the team. You bring out your rookie quarterback, even though he's not necessarily ready. I get that. Get him reps. I think that's important. They could also be thinking, let's see in the schedule where we think it's the best to bring him in.
Right.
Right. If you're looking at New England's schedule right now, and you look at it and you think, okay, is it the first quarter of the season? Where do they make that decision to bring in Drake? If Jacoby is struggling a little bit, does it feel better to bring in a guy like Drake May to say, okay, you saved the day? What a ramp up of confidence that is for you, versus you came in and you lost the 3 or 4 games, and now we're struggling with our confidence and momentum within the organization. So I'm sure there are some psychological, again, nuances to why they're doing this. Again, I'm a big fan of playing your guy out the gate. And I know Tom Brady made comments about this, and I get where his comments are coming from. This is a very different NFL and a very different team than what it was before when Tom was in that situation. And I say that with huge respect, of course, to him. I would want those young guys to get experience sooner than later. And that's where my head is as a team builder.
Yeah, I mean, we have on the flip side, we don't even have to go back as far as Tom Brady. You could look at Jordan Love, right, who sat on the bench, and this was a different situation, one the Falcons are likely looking at now with Michael Penix. But so I mean, it can work both ways. But in this particular case, you mentioned Matt Ryan developing some confidence. He makes that big play. I wonder in the case of Drake May if they're protecting the opposite from happening, and or from making him the next David Carr behind that O-line, because the one thing that everyone had consensus on in the preseason, regardless of what you thought about the quarterback play, was that the O-line looked like it might be a little bit shaky and might need some work, and that whoever sits back there might not be particularly protected or set up to succeed. And so I wonder how much that didn't factor into this decision, that, no offense to Jacoby Brissett, but they're not as invested in him.
They're
And
not.
so put him behind that O-line, and then just make sure that the O-line gets some reps, and that they're better able to put Drake May in a position where he looks ready to play, whether he even is or not. Like, now we're just evaluating him and not just looking at him in a terrible situation that's not really fair.
No, that's a great point. It's another good GM mind point there, Lindsay. Good job. I like it, because that is exactly one of the things that we'd be going through. We would sit down as anyone as GM and head coach, and you would go through all the scenarios with that first year quarterback and how it's going to affect, how it's not going to affect. Again, remember with Drake May, one of the most rounded individuals that came out in the draft, too. Great guy, very smart guy. He's a guy that you can work with. And I also believe he's not only a guy you can work with on the field, that's an undershoot, but it's also, he's the kind of guy that I think and I would believe understands how this process is going to be. He's not a flipping off the cuff guy who's going to lose his mind because he's not out there, being picked where he was, that he's not out there playing out the gate. I'm sure he's competitive. I get it. But he is probably listening to the head coach and Elliott Wolf, who Elliott's a very good personnel man, and they're going to be talking about the benefits of playing out the gate, or maybe in time, maybe in the first quarter of the season, or maybe even earlier.
You also mentioned Bill Belichick's eval and talking about his feet and his footwork. And that's something that I've heard a lot of people who watch the tape and do that kind of tape evaluation bring up. JT O'Sullivan does, I think, a very good job. And he has consistently harped on the fact that his footwork, he thinks, is a little bit inconsistent. And specifically, he used a phrase that I think goes to the offensive line, which is that he moves to trouble sometimes in the pocket. And that behind this particular offensive line, just connecting some dots, I think that could potentially be something that they want him to work on before putting him back there. There's also strategy involved here, right? From a general manager or even a head coaching standpoint, everybody's looking out for their jobs, wanting to manage expectations, keep the fans happy, give them something to point to at the end of the season if it's not a particularly productive season from a win-loss standpoint. And so if you don't start Drake May and you do bring him in later, now your record might be what it is, but you can always say, man, yeah, that was rough, but look at what we have to build on, and we have hope for the future, which brings me to Bo Nix, who is going to start week 1 for Denver. They've gone in the opposite way. They've decided to start him out of the gate. They are, and I alluded to this at the beginning of the show, one of the teams that decided to keep 3 quarterbacks. And I think it's an interesting conversation to figure out what's going on in their head as far as that's concerned, because on the surface, you could look at, yeah, Bo Nix in that quarterback room, we want as many as possible because we're not totally sure that it's going to hit with any of them. But if you start the rookie out of the gate, there's also a part of me that's going, you can't go backwards. You can't pull him after you use the 12th pick in the draft on him. If he struggles, you can't just go, oh, well, that didn't work. Here's Jared Stidham, guys, or Zach Wilson, right? Like, so strategically, what do you, there's 2 totally different approaches here. What's your take on, I guess, the best approach and how much you think these front offices are keeping these things I'm talking about in mind?
Well, in the spirit of Bo Nix, by the way, I love the fact that you have a head coach when the head coach is really behind the quarterback. I know that sounds a little odd, right? Sean Payton does great work. Obviously, he's a fantastic coach. He understands about quarterbacks and quarterbacks in his system, a la Kyle Shanahan, right? They're gonna take the quarterback that they truly do think will maximize, and even at a value with what look. You see what they did in San Francisco versus Trey Lance, right? They settled on someone who, in the end, Kyle believed could run the system, and we've seen that he can. Bo Nix, back to Bo. Bo is a strong, big, confident guy with really good maturity and an understanding of systems and plays within the system really well. I love the fact that Bo Nix is with Sean Payton because that's what that man needs as a head coach, right? I don't think he needs that person who's just going to kind of freewheel it, right? He's going to need someone that's going to be mature enough to follow what's going on with the system. So that is one of the things that's been on my mind a lot. Again, I'm fond of Bo Nix and the way that he plays. I think he's tough. I think he can run the ball when it's necessary. I mean, I've seen him taking some big hits and deliver some blows on top of that. Not that we want him to do it in the NFL, but I just love that competitive side of him combined with the maturity. So I will be excited to see. I don't know if that necessarily answers your question, but this is a guy that I think all of our eyes need to be on to see how that 10 to 15 to 20 ranked quarterback or picked quarterback operates versus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah. I think what you just said is really interesting because it does there's a lot of psychological stuff that goes on with a coach, right? Like you have to take care of, especially with a younger quarterback, you have to There's a lot that goes into it. We're all like, human nature is that if you think your boss is a strong believer in you, you're going to feel more free to make a mistake here or there without fearing that short hook. You're not going to play scared. You're not going to be tight, all that kind of stuff. And I think that there's psychological upside to all of that. And I think when you're talking about Sean Payton, I would sense that this would be huge for Bo to feel kind of free. Like, you are out of the gate, my guy. I saw you in the draft. I wanted you in the draft. You're the sixth quarterback to go in this year's class. We still took you with the 12th pick because you are ours. We like you so much. And I think that it's easy in this case to know, to sense that there's probably some truth to that. If you're Bo Nix and you're like, is this guy just
Mhm.
blowing smoke at me because I'm the guy that he got? They literally shipped Russell Wilson, who, from a casual fan standpoint watching the game, was like, well, he was much better last year than he was the year before, but he wasn't running the offense the way that Sean Payton wanted him to run the offense. And now he's in Pittsburgh as a result. So you bring in Bo and you go, you are the guy who's going to run my offense. I like what I'm seeing. You build up that confidence. And so to go with that right out of the gate, I think is probably a
Right.
smart strategy.
And you build it out of the gate with a guy like Sean Payton, again, who's going to pull him aside before any of this, in all the meetings that they have, and he's going to be very direct with them. I will come down on you, Bo. You
Yeah.
need to be the mature guy that understands that. You need to be able to have that conversation with me off record in the meeting room alone. You're not going to go in the tank because I get after you on A, B, and C and X, Y, and Z. And that is something that is important. Everyone has egos, right? Coaches
Yep.
have egos, quarterbacks have egos, and you want to kick it out, kick it off and jump out the gate in a positive way there, in an understanding way there, and back to an aggressive in a way that you're not going to be dragging your dauber because your head coach has strong ideas about how he wants you to do things so that you maximize your ability. And look, I am very curious. I mean, you read some of the quotes about the veteran quarterbacks that they had there that were competing, right? Do,
Mhm.
do we have a half a minute to talk about that? What was your
Yeah.
take on that? Stidham, when you're talking about that, Zach Wilson, like
Zach.
what were your thoughts that way? Here's this young guy coming in. These
Mhm.
guys are both looking at how their careers are going to move in the next little while. Here's a young guy coming in, 12th pick, not the second or the first pick of the draft. I find it really interesting.
I do too, because I don't think that it was as obvious. Like with the 12th pick, if you take a quarterback there in a number of other years, that guy's automatically starting anyway. So that's really high to take a quarterback. And I would think that the tea leaves probably read he's going to start year one. But because he was the sixth quarterback taken, then I think that there was almost just narratively a little bit less pressure on that to happen because all the attention's over here in Chicago and in Washington, and we're focusing on different rookie quarterbacks. So in that room, I think you go into the training camp and preseason is saying like, I don't know, it's up for grabs, go win it. And then when he does win it against people who are admittedly not like high end veterans, they're people who might be competent to run an offense, then I think that maybe it makes it a little bit more interesting that he was able to win the job right out of the gate, because I could have very easily seen them setting the table. And I think that they brought those guys in order to do this, just in case, to take a Patriots approach, right? Where
Think,
they would go like,
yeah.
we'll have Stidham start the season. When you're ready, go. Which I think makes me feel confident, more confident maybe, that Bo might actually just be ready.
Think about it from the perspective as well as you and I like him a lot. I mean, George Payton is a great guy and he's a really good football man.
Mhm.
After Russell Wilson, you want nothing more than a move that's being made to fall into place well, right? You're not as much thinking about the older free agents that are coming in. You are thinking about, I am being evaluated on my ability to acquire quarterbacks,
Mhm.
right? Whether that was Sean Payton's pick or not, George was right there. George is a general manager, and George is going to be obviously very keenly aware of how that whole thing operates, right? I find that fascinating as well. George is an even keel guy, and he knows football inside out. He's going to be watching the building and the development of a guy like Bo Nix, and it's going to be very important to how they continue to build their team into the future, years beyond this, for him and that team that's in place right now.
To the point about him, though, um, doing it in this order by playing the rookie first. do you set yourself up? Like, did you now put yourself on the, like, metaphorical hot seat if this goes south this season? If you have to pull him and just say, hey guys, he needs more time. Like, we all know that nobody has that kind of time to be like, oh, well, yeah, I'll be super understanding about that. They're going to be like, he's a bust. And then the narrative is one that's out of control and you have to kind of pull it back. And now you're doing PR damage and you're trying to convince everybody that you didn't make a mistake and he's totally fine and he might be fine. And when you do it in this order, are you putting yourself out on a limb if you're the general manager and the coach?
I think, yeah, I think you are. But again, not for long league. Let's get operational now as quickly as possible. Let's move on from the Russell Wilson debacle and let's show the world, show everyone, because they obviously believe in it, right? I get your point that your mind goes into really interesting spots, right? Questioning about that. We often say in football, though, you hesitate too much and you overthink too much, you're not going to be able to sign that player. You're not going to make the move. All of a sudden, you're hesitant. There's just a fine line there, honestly, Lindsay. And they're great points. I think they are committed to the fact that this guy is such an important part of the relationship with Sean Payton. And I think George Payton, the general manager, understands that as well. The best chance they have is for that head coach to be in lockstep with the quarterback. And he is in lockstep, at least apparently, to us with a guy like Bo Nix. Let's go with it. I would say as a general manager, let's go. Let's go.
I want to bring in our producer, Matt Stopsky, because he was doing some research. Hi. He was doing some research, looking through some stuff, Thomas, and had an interesting observation with regards to Bo Nix.
Yeah, so I looked at this offensive coaching group of Sean Payton, Joe Lombardi, John Morton, Davis Webb, a group that goes back to like the late 90s as a QB coach with Sean in Philadelphia. None of these guys have ever had a rookie starting quarterback in this almost 3 decades of coaching experience. So
it's a great stat there. Stopsky jumping in. I love it.
That's what I'm paid for. See y'all later.
Stopsky.
It's specifically not what you're paid for, but we love that you're jumping in anyway to contribute your analysis. I love that you're finding stats, and that is interesting because it means that you don't have we talk a lot. You call back to your Atlanta days, which is what we want you to do because that's your experience. These are the anecdotes that you bring to the table that are relevant, and you can lift them up and put them in this situation. So, well, when this happened, here's how we handled it. In this case, none of them, it seems, have any of that kind of experience to call back on with regards to those young quarterbacks like that.
That's right. Well, look, I mean, this whole young quarterback idea, and I mentioned it in I think on the cut down show. If you're given the go ahead from an owner, right, that you as the head coach and the GM head coach are given the go ahead, like you have time to build here, right? That does not happen much anymore. The owners, of course, and because of the way the NFL is set, you're not given as a GM 5 years with this quarterback and this head coach to really develop. It is fast and furious out of the gate. I keep using that line, but it is. It's like you better have your cleats tied up and your helmet strapped up, et cetera, and ready to go. And you have to believe in yourself because in 2 years, and I experienced it. I mean, Arthur Blank was a fantastic owner. He didn't bother with me on picks. He didn't bother with Dan and me or Mike Smith and me on a lot of different levels, but he had really high expectations. And if you're not winning in year 2, I'd say even in year 1, like what's going on? Let's call out, let's pressure, let's press here and figure out what's going on. It's very different than saying, that's why I come back to the idea of first year quarterbacks. Yes, Green Bay did it. They did it with Aaron Rodgers. They done it with Jordan Love, of course. There are very few programs that are given the go ahead. Yeah, that guy can wait 4 years. That's a completely different space to be in as a GM and a head coach.
100%. Yeah. So there are 2 rookie quarterbacks that we haven't talked about yet that I think the expectations are very, very high for. And their coaches and general managers will get no leash whatsoever if this doesn't work out because people think it's going to right out of the gate. So I'm going to let you decide which one we talk about first by answering this question. Let's assume that they're both going to be great and you think that they both have the potential to be awesome in this league. Which of the 2, Caleb or Jaden, do you think that we will see that from first?
So let's talk about Caleb Williams, but I don't necessarily believe it's going to be that cut and dry, because when we get into Jaden Daniels, I'll talk about how much I do like Jaden Daniels. Of course, I like Caleb Williams a lot. Let's talk about Chicago, though. Let's talk about that offense, right? Let's talk about
Yep.
supporting cast.
Oh, holy heck.
I mean, that is really, it's now as positive as it is, right? You can run down how you want to run down them. We've talked about, the supporting cast. We've talked about running back. We've talked about receivers. We've talked about a tight end. We've talked about developing. That is a positive for a rookie quarterback. Move the ball, high percentage shots. You got the tight end that you can hit. And I'm a huge believer in tight ends for that reason, especially for young guys. Get the quarterback who can believe in himself, hitting the ball underneath, take some shots deep. Of course, he can scramble, do all the things that he can do. However, however is it also is a strong machine that you have to keep happy.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about all of a sudden that free agent receiver who we all know is a very good receiver that they signed last year, right? Last year.
Talking about Keenan or DJ? Yeah. Well, from
DJ,
2 years ago.
2 years ago.
Okay.
When you're talking about DJ, that guy wants to get the ball. All of a sudden, 2 games go by and he's got a couple grabs because balls are underneath in a different way. It becomes complicated. All I'm saying is that is a lot. That's a lot on a coaching staff to keep everyone happy, but also to make sure that you're developing that quarterback in the best way. You have to think beyond the other guys who might be miffed that they're not getting enough balls, because ultimately it is about developing Caleb now. Mm-hmm. And if that means a lot of underneath shots, you're not getting the ball deep, and your guy, DJ Moore is wide open, play in, play out, that just becomes a little more complicated.
Well, a few thoughts on that. First of all, Keenan in the last, like last year for sure, it felt like his route tree kind of truncated a little bit, and he had so much success with the Chargers. But as he gets older and maybe loses a step, then they kind of took away more of those longer developing routes, and he was a little bit more of the short to intermediate. And so in that mind, when you say that guy that you can get the ball to, I'm thinking Keenan is a nice safety blanket.
As well as Cole Kmet, but look, and then you have
Gerald Everett, yeah.
Exactly. But then you roll with you're bringing in this new other draft pick you have, Rome Odunze, and you're like, that guy has ability, really, really interesting ability at a lot of levels. Obviously, he can go down and go up and get the ball. He's a tough ass. I just really like what they're doing there as far as building it. When you look at Ryan Poles and his approach to this, and a head coach who was very hot there out from the very beginning, right? That's settling in a little bit here. This is going to be a very interesting and fun year to watch the Bears. And by the way, they're trying to get a stadium built. So
this will help in that regard.
That's right.
I mean, I can't even, it's no secret. I'm a huge fan of Caleb. And it's not just because I went to USC. I'm not blindly supporting every Trojan. I am in my heart, but not in my analysis. For me, the only bias that might creep in is I told you I don't watch a ton of college football, and I actually have seen him. And because I've seen him, I feel confident. I know not everything translates to the NFL that you see in college, and the hash marks and all this stuff is so different, and it makes it hard to just pick up your evaluation and plop it in the NFL. But I think because of his strengths, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you see when you watch his tape, the things that he does well, and I'm going to do it. I'm just going to do it again. I'm going to continue to use the name Patrick Mahomes, even though that comp is like, whoo, don't do that to the guy. It's the style. It's the style. He's not a shooter. He's a creator. It's that, like, the way that he, you're going to talk about Jaden Daniels in a second, and he's a guy who people are going to talk about his rushing ability. Caleb has the exact same rushing ability, I think. He's looking to throw. He's got his eyes up the entire time that he's flushed out of the pocket. And we saw like his time to throw time in, college, and he's taking time to get the ball out. But he's still throwing it, right? Like, so he's still looking for what's going to develop downfield and then make these crazy throws and all the arm slots and all that kind of stuff. And I just think there will certainly be a learning curve, and there will be mistakes that he'll make. But the talent is so wild to me and so special and different, and something that you just don't see come along very frequently, that with that roster, I know my expectations are very high out of the gate. And so I hope I'm not pumping him up too much in my own head with, again, that roster. Like I think that my expectations for the Bears are pretty high this season.
When you think about Patrick Mahomes, I believe it was, what game was it in the season that he finally started? It wasn't at the beginning of the season. Was it 13, 14 games in?
I don't know
I
that right
can't
off the top of my
quite
head.
recall. We can find it, and Stopsky, you might be able to provide us with that. The reality is this guy's coming out from the very beginning, and he's playing now. He is all of that, right? He is special. His ability, and I love quarterbacks who can ad lib. I don't care if they're 6'4", 6'5", or they're 6'1", 6'2". When they can ad lib and they can make plays, they can make throws off balance, off camber, down here, up here. I love that, right? They're creating. And I do think that is a very positive about what he can do. He's such a competitive guy that way. Will make a lot of big time plays. How will he do that when the pressure's coming? And when you get, again, we always say this, these outrageously, in my mind, sometimes brilliant defensive coordinators in the NFL who are going after these young quarterbacks. We just saw this 17. Mahomes started week 17 of his rookie year. There's a little bit of a difference that way, right? Did he sit around that first year, and how did it affect? Now, Patrick Mahomes wasn't drafted first overall. So a little bit.
He had a little bit of time to get his feet wet at practice at the very least. Another thing that I just wanted to say about Caleb in response to the things that you said about the wide receiver room and the personalities and the like many mouths to feed and will they start chirping. The one thing that I do think about Caleb's personality that some people think is a knock, right? That he is a little bit confident, that he kind of does his own thing. I almost think that the NIL world of college creates like a mini pro. And I think that he has had so much experience taking so much shit from the outside and dealing with all of that. And in a way, and being a leader and being a professional, that I think he will go into that situation with a lot more confidence than a typical rookie quarterback would have done even 3 years ago, but certainly 5 years ago and whatever. I just think that they're coming in different now. And I think that what I've seen from him tells me that he can probably handle those personalities. I think that he'll be fine in that sense.
So this is a great topic, and we could spin on and on this. That don't sort of overestimate or underestimate, excuse me, the idea of how important, back to maturity, right? We were talking about that with Bo Nix. As a former general manager and working in the league for almost 30 years, you want to make sure that you're bringing that guy in who's at the helm, at that quarterback position. Your bars are so high. On intelligence, they're high. On management, they're high. On positive, passionate, and persevering. That's my tagline, by the way. I know it's alliteration, but that's what I believe in. You're looking for all that in that person that's now going to be leading your team, right? So it's a big deal. I am fascinated that this year's group, right, across the board, Caleb, again, there was some back and forth that people were talking about, as confident as he is, but he's a sound guy in many, many ways, right? But then you talk about Drake May, you talk about Michael Penix, you also talk about Bo Nix, JJ McCarthy, like those are all really, really sound people mentally. They're mature enough, they're interactive enough, they're communicative enough. You don't have anyone that was folded into that group who was an off the cuff, complete PIA, right? In our world, we know what that is, pain in the ass.
Oh, okay. I was going to ask. Sorry.
Yeah. So we think about that. This is another conversation we could have. Are you willing, okay, put your GM hat on, Lindsay, to bring in that quarterback that has unbelievable ability, big arm, makes plays, competitive, athletic, does all the stuff we're talking about, but you literally need 5 handlers to take care of this guy because he is that difficult. But you know that he has the ability, pure ability, to win a Super Bowl. Do you make that move, or do you ease up a little bit and take someone a little less who has all the other intangibles that you're looking for from that quarterback position?
That's a good question. I feel like that's kind of a case-by-case thing, and my brain went immediately to the Browns showing us that they are willing to do that a few years back. But who in this particular case, do you think that Caleb is that guy?
No, I don't.
I'm
thinking there are, and I was painting a very extreme picture.
Broad. Yeah.
Let's paint the picture of let's paint the picture of some of the quarterbacks that have come out before. Cam Newton, again, in no
Yes.
way am I parallel. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying he had more complications to
It's a
him that
lot.
the coaching staff had to deal with.
Yeah.
And he was unbelievably talented. Probably still is. When I hear him talk about, why is he, or I can't remember what was recently happening with some of the banter. I mean, that cat is huge. He's athletic. He can still probably gun the ball, all of that stuff. But let's come back to someone like that. What
Yeah.
would be your mind there? Not as extreme as I described. Are you
Well,
good?
at the risk of sounding like I'm avoiding answering the question or sitting on the fence, my answer would probably depend on the makeup of my team, where I am already in terms of my competitiveness. Am I starting from scratch? Am I a team like I don't know that I don't think Sean thinks of his team like this, but like the Broncos, who people are not expecting them to like. This isn't the year where they're like, "Hey, come win a Super Bowl for us. We're going to be really, really good and plug you in until they're good." I.e. CJ Stroud, or like the Patriots. If you're looking like we are in a full rebuild, the Patriots are a better example because it's a new coach. They're looking to like completely wipe, the old Patriot way off and start something fresh. I think in that case, you do not take the swing on the upside guy who maybe is going to create issues for you in the locker room because you need to build a culture. So if you're a team that doesn't check that box and you're like, we've got a ton of guys here who are really high end veterans and we're just missing that piece, and I think you're that piece, then I think I would probably be more willing to go ahead and take a swing on that guy.
Yeah, and I think in the end, back to bringing this back to the young quarterbacks that we have and playing quarterbacks early, and how we all want to do that. I've said this before, Lindsay, prior to you being on this show. As a general manager, you are 100% evaluated, amongst other things, but you, as your ability to bring in a quarterback and your
Yep.
ability to evaluate a quarterback. I would say, and we were talking about this earlier, Ostofsky and I were talking about the idea of how many of those general managers who won executives of the years over the last 20, 30 years had a pedestrian quarterback. I think it's very, very few. We can run them. It might have been a big time defense that brought them through for some reason. My point on that is it is really interesting. If you don't have an adept ability to figure out the quarterback situation, your time as a general manager, in my mind, high level executive, is limited, because what we're talking about today is massively important for you to parlay it into other contracts and to be with that team beyond the 3-4 years, 5 years that you even signed with.
Yeah. I'm going to hit pause on the Jaden Daniels conversation then, because that takes me to Minnesota, because JJ McCarthy got hurt. So he's out for the year. And so what about Kwesi? Like, you talking about general managers being on the hot seat and needing to find a quarterback. Well, if they go through a year here where they don't even have access to him, and they start, let's say it doesn't work with Sam Darnold, and they're not particularly competitive. I'm not convinced that it will be bad with Sam Darnold. That's a separate conversation. What if it is? Then, does JJ getting hurt potentially put Kwesi on the hot seat, or can he point to like, I didn't even have him, like wait till next year?
Look, we've talked about this before. Every general manager is on a hot seat, and you're kind of like, yeah, okay. My point is, it's always hot, it's always warm, maybe different degrees of it. You're looking at it right now from a quarterback standpoint that you just mentioned with JJ getting hurt. He got hurt. It's not something that Kwesi can deal with, right? Kwesi's a very smart man, and he's learning more and more to be the general manager of that football team. We know that. How Darnold works out, that does fall on the team builders, right? If Sam Darnold does not pan out, there better be the plan, of course. Otherwise, people will start throwing darts like crazy. And how do you get out of that? I think the Wilfs, I know that the Wilfs, as I know of them, they're a very smart ownership group. They're going to look at that situation and see how that whole thing is playing out. Again, there's some good football players. They have, by the way, I don't know if you know this. I'm not being tangential here. They have one of the best scouting staffs. Like, they have a lot of really talented personnel men with the Minnesota Vikings. So Kwesi's surrounded himself with really talented people. And, that was their decision to go with Sam as the number 2, I guess, or number 1, right? Was it talked about early that he was going to come into the season as being the number 1?
Yeah, we didn't know. It was very Denver Broncos-ish, right? Like where I don't know, I'm not saying anything about the starter. They're all going to go compete, and then obviously, I think JJ, the way that he looked, what little we did see of him, I think people were like, okay, this is set. Let's go with JJ. Very small sample size, and obviously the preseason, we don't know what to make of that. But yeah, I think it probably was trending in the direction of JJ personally, but obviously that had yet to be announced. So.
Well, this is an interesting point of SumerSports data gathering and data collection and the advanced analytics. If you truly looked at that and you said, how many times has a starting quarterback or projected starting quarterback, a big time investment, whether it's a draft or whether it's a free agency for an organization, gone down, backup comes in, or not projected to be starter comes in? How often did that head coach and general manager face dire circumstances where they were truly hot and truly were relieved of their duties, right?
Yeah.
I just, how much is, it feels as though the ownership groups have a really good grasp of that in the NFL. And yet, back to not for long, do they really? Do they
Yeah.
really understand that was an injury and, the veteran didn't really pan out? We'll
Mhm.
just go to the next year and start again. It's
Yeah.
not that way anymore.
Yeah. I would imagine that it depends on the owner in every situation. I mean, it's like, we can talk to fans a lot of times and explain away certain circumstances. And regardless of how many examples you can give or advanced analytics, they're like, I don't even know what that number means. It didn't look good. I'm done. So I would imagine it just kind of depends on who the owner is and how in the weeds they are and their ability to understand all of this different stuff, and whether they think you're barking up the right tree. Jaden Daniels, let's get to, and you brought up a good point about the Sumer data. We're going to have a lot more data
Yeah.
that will work its way into this show once the regular season is underway. So once we actually have that week 1, which by the way is my favorite week of the year, which
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's because I love the offseason so freaking much that by the time week 1 rolls around, like I like that more than, week 17, 18 fighting for playoff spots, because I want to know, so, okay, we've been talking about it all offseason, what it's going to look like. And now we finally get to see it. We get some of those questions answered. And so I love week 1 and I'm looking forward to having some of the data from it for us to react to and see what we were right about, what we were wrong about, and what environments actually are. But Jaden Daniels is a guy that I definitely want to talk to you about here, and what your expectations are for him, because you talk about some of those advanced stats, and like I've heard people say to me, Parker actually, who worked for SumerSports, came on the fantasy podcast that I do in the off season and mentioned a concern about a high like pressure to sack rate in college, and the fact that he was concerned about that being so high when he is painted as the guy with the rushing ability that he has. Like what do you make of that? Is that something that is not concerning to you, that he's taken a lot of sacks in that situation or did so in college? Or is that something that we're looking for here in the NFL as a potential red flag or thing to keep our eye on?
No, I don't want to overdo, that idea in my mind. Again, pure evaluation of a player like Jaden Daniels. There are so many positives to this football player, Lindsay, and his ability to move around. Back to athleticism, we talk about 2 rare athletes here, right? In Caleb and Jaden Daniels, and what they are doing and how they are functioning and what they're going to do when the bullets, again, the proverbial bullets are flying. We won't know until it happens, but I know that was something that was brought up in the offseason about the pressure to sack idea. It's funny. We look at those as as general managers and head coaches, and we sit there in our offices and we go over and over it. And we continue to watch a guy like this do all of the amazingly special things that he does as an athlete, as a quarterback. We watch his progression from the junior year or sophomore year to junior year. We see all of this and we're thinking, we know that, we put it in the back of our minds, and we keep moving forward on what this player can be for us. And so I'm not hung up on the data and the stat that was presented. And it was presented not only by Parker, it was presented last year by Eric Eager to me. We had many conversations about it.
Okay, but it's not one that you're particularly concerned about. Another thing, and I almost hate that I'm bringing up causes for concern for him and not for Caleb, because I hate that it might actually make me look biased. There are concerns about Caleb, but the specific ones I feel like are a little bit more specific that are coming up. So I'm able to get into a specificity that we might be able to bring some value to in terms of things that we're looking for or not, as the case may be, in your analysis about pressure to sack rate. Time to throw in the preseason, it just seemed obvious. And I'm not even talking about like the actual stat or anything like that. I'm just saying, like, when you watched him in the preseason, it was clearly like a lot of, it was a quick passing game. ADOT's low, get it out really fast. And so I'm wondering what you think they were thinking in terms of putting him in that position, because it felt like it was somewhat purposeful, like not a lot of shots downfield, not a lot of stand in the pocket, and like, let's watch this drop back game develop. And so is that something that we have now that we haven't seen it? I'm wondering what it will actually look like. I don't know that answer yet, and I'll be looking for it in week 1, but what's your take on that?
Well, think about it this way. When Dan Quinn came in to the Atlanta Falcons, right? Dan was coming into a veteran quarterback, right? Matt Ryan was already established.
Mm-hmm.
When Dan was in Seattle, he had a very talented veteran quarterback. Basically, he wasn't in charge there, but as a D coordinator, he comes into this situation. He's got a first-time quarterback now, right? He's got Cliff Kingsbury, who has dealt with rookie quarterbacks, right? I think we were talking about that. Of course he did, right? He was, Cliff has got a really good understanding of that. So I believe that Dan, this is how I would imagine it happening. Dan Quinn and Cliff Kingsbury were sitting there meeting after meeting along with the staff, and they're talking about the best way to get this kid jump started into the NFL. And it is great athleticism, all of that. But let's make sure that we're in a good spot where we're building confidence. We all know Dan Quinn. He is about confidence, momentum. He's about the energy in the building, and he wants to make sure that someone's not kicking off their time as the head of that organization, as a quarterback, and throwing these long and intermediate balls, and they're falling aside. They're interceptions. Let's get this guy believing. This doesn't surprise me at all about their approach with a guy like Jaden Daniels. And that cat can throw the ball down the field. He can connect on deep balls. You're exactly right on that, though. It makes you think, and when you see how, what the timing was with the plays that they were putting him into. I just find it, again, fascinating where Dan was with quarterbacks, and now he's got truly the young rookie. Very, very important move for him in his second term as a head coach.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at the very least, I think that they'll be exciting to watch in Washington. I do wonder who he's going to have to throw the ball to. Like we talked about Caleb and all of the many pass catchers that we know are already good that he has there. And then you look at Washington's roster, and Terry McLaurin, I think, is a guy who probably flies under the radar to a degree because he hasn't had strong quarterback play. So I think he's not somebody who's become like the household name that he could have otherwise been, and maybe will be now. But you had Jahan Dotson, who didn't have the year last year that a lot of people were expecting him to have, and kind of fell off a little bit. And then they move him a little bit into the slot in the preseason, and then they deal him. And I don't know, just in terms of like looking at the roster and roster building, I'm wondering what this means for Jaden.
Well, I mean, and that's a great point. I mean, again, comparatively speaking to the firepower in Chicago, look, I like Zach Ertz. How old's Zach now? Is he in his mid-30s?
Just old.
He's a tough ass guy you want to lead with. He's a Dan Quinn guy, right? There's no question about it. But does he have that level of athleticism of some of the others just down the street and here in Atlanta? I mean, Kyle Pitts and what he is as an athlete compared to, where Zach Ertz right now, completely different. But that's what they went with, of course, right? Very, very important. We do get that. Yeah.
Also, you mentioned, since you mentioned the tight ends, there was part of me that went, and I know this is fantasy draft time of year, and we're all looking for like those under the radar guys that whatever. Ben Sinnott is a name that popped into my mind the day that they got rid of Jahan Dotson too, because I know Zach is certainly the more sure thing, but he's also older. Maybe he's a leader in that room. Ben Sinnott, with the type of player that he is, like a big physical yak type guy. There have been comparisons to Mark Andrews. And so I'm wondering if maybe they're like, we like what we're seeing here, and maybe you can kind of occupy that space of the field. But that might just be wishful thinking for the late rounds of my fantasy draft. Okay, so that's the rookie quarterbacks. Before I let you go today, I have to ask you a question about a bit of news that came out yesterday that I thought was very interesting. And I don't honestly know what to make of it. And that is that Kyren Williams is going to be fielding punts for the Los Angeles Rams. And I ask you this because the way that the Rams are with their backfield is like, we've gone away in the NFL from a lot of teams rolling out feature backs. Like there's a lot of committees and, you're the third down and you're the early down and Kyron's they're one of the few offenses that just rolls out a guy consistently and you get all the volume. So why would you put the guy that's going to get all the volume in the backfield also in a position to return punts and potentially get hurt or just put more tread on your tires?
Well, I mean, you'd have to look at that. We don't know it yet, but we've talked about Blake Corum before when we're talking about the acquisition, right? What are you holding your head for? Did I say the wrong thing?
No, I just want it to be Kyren. I don't want it to be Blake. My whole analysis all offseason is that he's insurance.
No, and when you do that, you start thinking about that. Like that's where my head goes. We're going to get them mixed up. It's about versatility. Let's get a good punt return situation. I'm sure he's a very good punt returner. You do run the risk. I had a real hard time with that, putting our star players, our receivers back there catching punts or running backs or whatever it may be. As much as I understand the importance of special teams, it just used to just gnaw at me thinking about that, right? The one time. This is a bad parallel, but I hated watching our athletes every once in a while on the field kicking field goals before practice. I'm like, are you kidding me? This kid yanks his hamstring and we no longer have Julio Jones as our number one receiver or Roddy White back in the day, right? Those are the kind of things. And I know it's a bad parallel, but it just has a GM on the edge of his seat the whole time watching, thinking about that, right? What if we did that and we injured him? Is it going to be a big drop off? My mind would say they're thinking it's not as much of a drop off maybe. And they do have some committee action there. I know it's killing you, but that's what I would think.
It's killing me. This is going to sneak the fantasy person is going to sneak out every once in a while. Thomas, I'm going to try and, keep it in check here. But Kyren also could also mean, just as you're talking, this occurs to me that, we've kind of gone away from valuing the running backs in the NFL in the last few years. And if they know that they have a backup, even if he is just going to be an insurance policy this year in Corum, maybe they look at it and they go, hey, let's just put the guy we think is the best punt returner out there. And if he does get hurt, like, no offense as a human, but oh well, next man up,
No question. Look, all of this, I know you can't wait because it's kicking off next week, right? So you'll be able to fire out. And I can tell, I love your passion, and I can tell we're gonna have some great fiery conversations here, which will be fantastic.
I know you're gonna be like, please stop texting me on Sunday. I'm gonna be like, we should talk about this. We should talk about that. What about this?
I love it.
Oh man. Well, I'm looking forward to it, Thomas. Every Tuesday and Thursday throughout the regular season, we'll be here, the SumerSports Show, to break things down. You can find us on Apple, Spotify. Again, as I mentioned, you can watch us on YouTube and Twitter also. Also, it's X. I'm never pivoting, Thomas. Okay. I just can't do it. It has to be. It feels weird to say, like, you can find me on X.
Yeah, that sounds a little odd, but you keep up with you threw out the word the other day, steezy.
Oh yeah, well, that's describing you, by the way.
That's a young word. I had to go back and look it up, and I thought as long as there wasn't an L in there in the place of T, I'm like, not that, so obviously it worked out well. But you're on
easy.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh,
I was hoping that wasn't it.
I just now got that. Yeah, there's going to be, if you ever want any notes on how the kids are talking these days, I am neck deep in that world.
You're SoCal, and I'm sure that's at the, right at the front of it all, right? We get it across the country in a different way. For sure.
Thomas, you're going to say something and I'm going to go, what, the Sigma? You wait. I'll just drop them every once in a while to keep you on your toes. Okay. This has been a blast for me, Thomas. I'm so looking forward to being able to have these conversations with you throughout the season. Thank you so much for joining us. For those of you that did, if you are not already a subscriber, please hit that subscribe button, leave a review. We'd love to hear from you, your thoughts on the ways that the things that you'd like to hear us discussing as the show goes on this season.
Shout out to Stopsky. I know you want to do that too. fantastic
yeah,
having
and
you on
thank
board.
you. And thank you. Stopsky wants us to thank him at the end of every episode. I'm just joking. He didn't say that, but we will. Thank you very much to our producer extraordinaire, Matt Stopsky, for his hard work today. And we'll be